I am the Philosophical Bachelor, and today I want to talk about the Varieties of Religious Experience by William James. Just as there are many religions, William James recognizes that there are many ways that believers can live their life of faith and experience the divine. However, despite the diversity of religions and hence of religious experiences, he attempts to draw out what is common to them in a series of 20 public talks at the University of Edinburgh in 1901 to 1902 under the auspices of the prestigious Gifford Lectures, whose theme is theology. James is a psychologist trained in medicine, though he did not practice, and a philosopher who is interested in religion. His aim is to speak on the personal experience of religion and not the institutions of religion. James is best known for his work on pragmatism, and even in these lectures, the approach he adopts is pragmatist, where beliefs are tested by their consequences, where a claim is true if and only if it is useful. Though James did not use those words, the mantra for pragmatism is popularly known to be "truth is what works." His methodology is likewise pragmatist, examining limit cases where the experience is extreme so that he can better discern the essence of the experiences. These can be so extreme that the subject seems psychotic, but when coupled with a sufficiently high intellect, they can yield mystical experiences that result in intellectual and moral elevation. He argues that even if the origin of the mystical experience is pathological, that should not discount the spiritual value of the experience. In keeping with the pragmatist doctrine, what matters is the fruits of the experience, such as increased compassion for others or an enhanced knowledge of the divine for the subject, regardless of its source, even regardless of whether or not the God believed in is real. Just to be clear, when the word spiritual is used in this article, it need not always be read with a religious connotation. It can be referring to the spirit within us, our soul, mind, or consciousness, or it can be referring to the spirit of the cosmos or of the divine. He surmises that there are 5 prime characteristics of the religious life. 1. That the visible world is part of a more spiritual universe from which it draws its chief significance. 2. That union or harmonious relation with that higher universe is our true end. 3. That prayer or inner communion with the spirit thereof, be that spirit, God, or law, is a process wherein work is really done, as spiritual energy flows in and produces effects, psychological or material, within the phenomenal world. 4. A new zest which adds itself like a gift to life, and takes the form either of lyrical enchantment or of appeal to earnestness and heroism. 5. An assurance of safety and a temper of peace, and in relation to others, a preponderance of loving affections. James argues against a solely materialist or scientific interpretation of the experiences, which tendency was present in his day and continues still today. For instance, a particular part of the brain was activated during one's mystical experience, and hence it accounts for the experience completely. James thinks that while there is physical brain activity, this activity is not the cause, but an effect of the experience. To deny that there was anything spiritual happening just because the sciences are unable to explain the spiritual is a gross mistake. The brain activity that is observed during a mystical experience can be described with existential propositions on the physical level, but to give the experience meaning calls for spiritual judgments. There is more happening than just the physical, than what is happening with our bodies and its organs. Our spirit is the being that gives the experiences meaning. Hence, his method is not to examine the physiology of the subjects, the way cognitive science today examines brain scans and correlate them to mental events. Instead, he examines descriptive accounts of those who have undergone such experiences, whether they are self-described or as described by their biographers. Since their experiences are important landmarks in the lives of the subjects, there is a high degree of sentimentality or emotionality involved in them. They are subjective accounts, not objective ones as demanded by the scientific method, but how can they be objective since they are highly personal experiences? Hence, the methods of science are ill-suited to study religious experiences. This, however, does not make them not real. It only shows that science has its limits. There is a plurality of religions, cultures, contexts, and hence of religious experiences. No two of us have identical difficulties, nor should we be expected to work out identical solutions. One of us must soften himself, another must harden himself, one must yield a point, another must stand firm, in order the better to defend the position assigned him, writes James. Because everyone is different, and hence requires different things from their God, the divine does not have one single universal quality, but a group of them such that each person can find what he needs in order to have worthy missions in life. For some, they need their God to be a God of battles. For others, to be a God of peace. Each attitude being a syllable in human nature's total message, it takes the whole of us to spell the meaning out completely, James observes. One clear instance James elaborates of this is how sick souls have different religious needs from healthy-minded souls. Sick souls are those who are systematically pessimistic, who feel a profound need to make sacrifices as penance for their sins, while their healthy-minded are able to throw such a burden off, inclined towards optimism that the world and themselves are as they should be or are fundamentally good. Is a master religion possible or desirable, such as a science of religion? His answer is an emphatic no, since knowledge about a thing is not the thing itself. Living the religious life is more important than theoretical knowledge about it. Life exceeds knowledge about life. Moreover, a student of the science of religions may wind up atheistic. Religion has so many groveling and horrible superstitions that a presumption easily arises in his mind that any belief that is religious probably is false, explains James. Only an anachronism, a case of survivor that we have since outgrown. As for science itself, the natural sciences have their own scope, which does not overlap with the knowledge of spirit. According to James, its materialism inclines the influence of science against the notion that religion should be recognized at all. James writes, "The pivot round which the religious life revolves is the interest of the individual in his private personal destiny. Religion, in short, is a monumental chapter in the history of human egotism. Today, quite as much as at any previous age, the religious individual tells you that the divine meets him on the basis of his personal concerns. However, objectivity as demanded by science repudiates the personal point of view, quite careless of their bearing on human anxieties and fates. Science tells us of our insignificance at the cosmic level, with nature having sympathy neither for our continued existence nor our extinction. The God whom science recognizes must be a God of universal laws exclusively, a God who does wholesale, not a retail business. He cannot accommodate his processes to the convenience of individuals," James adds. This point of view is known as deism. Testimonial accounts of people's personal experiences are unverifiable. If they are accepted, then truth was what had not yet been contradicted. Most things were taken into the mind, accepted from the point of view of their human suggestiveness, and the attention confined itself exclusively to the aesthetic and dramatic aspect of events, James tells us. Science had in the past not yet advanced to the level where it can explain many phenomena. But even today, where scientific explanations are the gold standard for truth, they do not carry the emotional resonance needed for sincere belief. James writes, "Wait, movement, velocity, direction, position. What thin, pallid, uninteresting ideas compared to the richer, animistic aspects of nature that make phenomena picturesquely striking or expressive. It is the terror and beauty of phenomena, the promise of the dawn and of the rainbow, the voice of thunder, the gentleness of the summer rain, the sublimity of the stars, and not the physical laws which these things follow, by which the religious mind still continues to be most impressed. Our experiences are intimate, felt deeply, and not merely understood abstractly. So long as we deal with the cosmic and the general, we deal only with the symbols of reality. But as soon as we deal with private and personal phenomena as such, we deal with realities in the completest sense of the term, James adds. Experience comprises objective and subjective parts. The objective is what we think of, while the subjective is our inner state in which this thinking comes about. The inner state is our very experience itself. Its reality and that of our experiences are one, he tells us. A thought thus requires 4 elements. 1. A consciousness. 2. Its object. 3. Our attitude towards it. And 4. A sense of self from which our attitude comes from. That unshareable feeling may be disparaged for its egotism, may be sneered at as unscientific, but it is the one thing that fills up the measure of our concrete actuality, explains James. If that emotional core in a belief is stripped out, we may have pure objectivity, but then it will only be a partial reality. The axis of reality runs solely through the egotistic places, he adds. What makes something real to conscious beings such as ourselves is what we experience in the form of feelings and sensations, along with the thoughts they bring about. Just because science is unable to handle this emotionality and subjectivity does not mean that they should be suppressed, because that will cause the entire experience to be lost. James says that it is akin to having a paper menu for a meal as opposed to the food itself. The practice of science has such a tendency to mistake the menu for the food, but religion makes no such blunder. The very advantage science has of objectivity becomes its Achilles heel, since it is unable to consider the essential subjectivity of human experience. One common idea of why we have religious belief is so that we can better survive, where we try to coerce spiritual powers into being on our side against a harsh world. James rejects such a survivor theory of religion because it implies that if there are errors in carrying out our beliefs, for instance in practices we consider barbaric today, such as human sacrifice, the field of religion should be altogether abandoned. That is what an intellectual understanding of religion entails. Instead, according to James, we need to return to the emotional core of religious belief. Rehabilitating the element of feeling in religion and subordinating its intellectual part is what is needed, because feeling is where we can catch real fact in the making and directly perceive how events happen, and it is how work is actually done. By removing feelings, what is alive in religious belief is stripped out of it. His example is how, if the movement of the frames is taken away in a movie reel, all we have left is a static picture, losing its dynamism. By being religious, we establish ourselves in possession of ultimate reality at the only points at which reality is given to us to guard, says James. So what can all religious people agree on? James wants to capture that small nucleus of commonality, after which all the diversity found in individuals and their respective beliefs can be grafted and flourish as richly as you please. He terms this additional diversity over-belief, which he considers as the most important part of the belief, though not the subject under examination in these lectures. Here, he examines the feelings and conduct of believers. Their religious feelings impart zest, courage, readiness, and endurance. He thinks that the faith state itself has minimal intellectual content. Instead, it is of emotions such as mystical raptures, enthusiasm, a feeling that great and wondrous things are in the air. Moreover, religious belief has real physical effects, such as a biological stimulant and anesthetic effect on action and endurance. The addition of intellectual content, such as creeds, then give us religions. So faith state plus creed equals religion. James cites James Luber, who sums up the pragmatist approach to personal religion in terms of a subjective utility. So long as men can use their God, they care very little who he is, or even whether he is at all. God is not known, he is not understood, he is used, sometimes as meat purveyor, sometimes as moral support, sometimes as friend, sometimes as an object of love. If he proves himself useful, the religious consciousness asks for no more than that. Does God really exist? How does he exist? What is he? Are so many irrelevant questions. Not God, but life. More life, a larger, richer, more satisfying life, is in the last analysis, the end of religion. The love of life, at any and every level of development, is the religious impulse. James also cites Wilhelm Bender, who reframes what religion is about. Not the question about God and not the inquiry into the origin and purpose of the world is religion, but the question about man. All religious views are anthropocentric. Religion is that activity of the human impulse towards self-preservation by means of which man seeks to carry out his essential vital purposes through against the adverse pressure of the world by raising himself freely towards the world's ordering and governing powers when the limits of his own strength are reached. I think this notion is similar to what pioneering anthropologist Bronislaw Malinowski discovered when studying the Trobriand Islanders from 1915 to 1918. He actually lived among them compared to early anthropologists such as Lucien Levy-Bruhl, who merely studied letters and books of other people's accounts. Levy-Bruhl derided the natives he studied as people so bogged down in their superstition that they are incapable of reasoning properly, while Malinowski in his fieldwork realized that the natives are hyper-rational. They do what they can by weeding their fields and building fences, but pray to their gods about things outside their control, such as the weather or natural disasters. Notwithstanding the emotional core of personal religion, truth of course still matters, though we should recall that the pragmatist view of truth is what works. Are religions true? Since they express different events and creeds, is there a common core that is true? This core, according to James, is that human beings face an uneasiness with their existence. There is something wrong about us as we naturally stand, he explains of this view. Religions offer a solution where moral wrongness meets salvation. We are saved from the wrongness by making proper connections with the higher powers. A person who recognizes that there is something wrong already has gone a step beyond what is wrong. He seeks a solution of something higher than himself and his relation with that something. In the very act of seeking, there is already a better part of himself that is doing the seeking. When the solution arrives, he can identify his being with that better part of himself. If that solution is in the form of religion, James tells us that he becomes conscious that this higher part of himself is conterminous and continuous with a more of the same quality, which is operative in the universe outside of him, and which he can keep in working touch with, and in a fashion get on board of and save himself when all his lower being has gone to pieces in the wreck. When the uneasiness arises, the subject becomes a divided self, who faces a struggle between the better and worse parts of himself. A recentering of the self occurs after encountering the solution brought about by the external power. The sense of union with this power justifies one's feeling of security and joy. James thinks this description fits all religious conversion accounts across the various religions. It explains the psychology of conversion, but there is in addition a physical biological change in the convert. Spiritual strength really increases in the subject. A new life opens for him, James adds. This change, however, remains subjective. Is there an objective truth to his belief? That is the work of theology, to theorize on the being of that higher power. These can be theories about God. It can also be theories merely of a stream of ideal tendency embedded in the eternal structure of the world. A naturalistic theory of a tendency for things to incline towards goodness based on the theorist's belief that that is the way nature operates. All religions agree that it acts as well as exists, and that something really is effected for the better when you throw your life into its hands. They only differ on the details. James turns to the role of the subconscious in mediating between religious phenomena and physical phenomena. More is happening in our minds than we are aware of, some of which takes place in our subconscious. Banal examples by James include imperfect memories and silly jingles, which account for much of the content of what is happening in the subconscious, though he speculates that the source of the performances of genius is also the subconscious, where invasions from it trigger conversion, mystical experiences, and prayer. The religious ascribe to external higher powers what may instead be the higher faculties of our own hidden mind. Some religions, such as Hinduism, are commensurate with the latter, where the Atman, the absolute soul, is within us, so there can be a union of our finite selves with it. The conscious person is continuous with a wider self, through which saving experiences come, he adds. James considers this as literally and objectively true, whether the wider self is the self widened by the subconscious or by an external power. Be it the subconscious or an external supernatural power, when we connect with it, real effects are produced in the phenomenal world, such as when we become better people or conduct ourselves more kindly. That which produces effects within another reality must be termed a reality itself, reasons James. A thing that can produce an effect must be real, even if it is unseen or mystical. Some call the higher power God, where in opening ourselves to his influence, our deepest destiny is fulfilled. James believes that a belief in God is instinctive for human beings. People are wont to explain that God is real since he produces real effects such as an enhanced sense of security for oneself and the cosmos at large. He writes, "This world may indeed, as science assures us, someday burn up or freeze. But if it is part of his order, the old ideals are sure to be brought elsewhere to fruition, so that where God is, tragedy is only provisional and partial, and shipwreck and dissolution are not the absolutely final things. Hence we also have a need to go beyond the personal, to enter into wider cosmic relations in order to justify the subject's absolute confidence and peace." James thinks that philosophical arguments on the existence of God convince no one except those who already believe in the existence of God. However, religion helps us view things in a rosier light, but it is something more, namely a postulator of new facts as well. He says, "The world interpreted religiously is not the materialistic world over again, with an altered expression. It must have, over and above the altered expression, a natural constitution different at some point from that which a materialistic world would have. It must be such that different events can be expected in it. Different conduct must be required." James believes the pragmatic way of taking religion to be the deeper way. It gives it body as well as soul. It makes its claim, as everything real must claim, some characteristic realm or fact as its very own. The actual inflow of energy in the faith state and the prayer state. James' own overbelief is that the world of our present consciousness is only one of many worlds of consciousness that exist, and that those other worlds must contain experiences which have a meaning for our life also. The real world is more intricately built than physical science allows. He asks, who knows whether the faithfulness of individuals here below to their own pour-over beliefs may not actually help God in turn to be more effectively faithful to his own greater task? He thinks that in communion with the ideal, new force comes into the world and new departures are made here below. He admits that this belief puts him in the crasser class of supernaturalists who think that there can be divine interventions in the phenomenal world relative to the refined universalistic supernaturalism of the deists, where there exist higher powers which are unable to interfere. James thinks this because for a person, the particulars matter more than the universal. The whole interest of the question of God's existence seems to me to lie in the consequences for particulars which that existence may be expected to entail, he writes. His overbelief is hence towards the karmic. The only thing that religious experience unequivocally testifies to is that we can experience union with something larger than ourselves, and in that union find our greatest peace, he writes. While he admits that what believers have is not certainty but only a chance of salvation, he believes that the existence of the chance makes the difference between a life of which the keynote is resignation and a life of which the keynote is hope, hence the will to believe in a higher power. James's theory of religion highlights the critical importance of personal experience in concretizing one's religious belief. The emotion that accompanies such experience enlivens one's belief, such that even if the belief turns out to be false, so long as it serves the subject, she tends to keep believing. Religious belief may be a deep-seated instinctive human need to understand an incomprehensible or confusing world, and to feel secure and cared for. The believer's belief is reinforced when she sees real fruits resulting from her beliefs. If there is a change before and after conversion, a pragmatist such as James will argue that something is real as it is the cause of the change, be it one's subconscious psychology or an external divine power. It almost does not matter what, because what cannot be denied are the religious experiences and their effects which are real. His arguments in the variety of religious experience, since they are pragmatists, are a fortiori vulnerable to criticisms against pragmatism in general, chief of which is pragmatism's scant regard for truth. The mind is a powerful organ which can generate somatic effects that are indistinguishable for either truth or sincerely believed falsehoods, commonly known as the placebo effect. Religions, both mainstream and bogus, can provide its believers experiences of the kind that James describes, which surely is problematic for logical and empirical reasons. First, the logical reason. What is bogus cannot be considered true merely because it produces desirable effects. While religious belief and the veracity of its experiences cannot be verified by the scientific enterprise, science is not the only source of knowledge. Historical and archaeological evidence, failures of claims made in its scriptures, logical contradictions, and immoral fruits can suggest heresy in a particular religion's doctrines, though it can be difficult to decide which authority is suitable to judge on the matter. This is especially so if the authority is ecclesiastical, since the opinion of another religion contains a potential conflict of interest as it competes for the same pool of believers. For a staunch believer, falsity claims against one's religion can feel like persecution rather than protection. Second, the empirical reason. Mystical experiences have been experienced by believers in religions that have since been debunked. Believers in the ancient Greek gods have had mystical experiences that bore positive fruits. Socrates tells us of a daemon who dissuades him from bad acts, while the oracle in Delphi delivers predictions and advice through their communion with the gods. Are those proof of the veracity of the Greek gods? Moreover, truth is valuable for its own sake as a source of reliability and not merely useful for its outcomes. Lies may be effective in generating desirable outcomes, such as providing a mediocre actor the belief that he is a great one, giving him confidence to perform on stage. In the long run, however, truth is probably what is going to serve him better, so that he can pursue what he may in reality be more competent at, bringing him success rather than mediocrity. Truth as a foundation for building one's life upon goes hand in hand with the horror of finding out that one's life is built upon delusions. Here is not the place to debate the merits of truth versus lies. I will assume the reader's stance is that truth is preferable. Hence the problem is, how shall we find out the truth, especially in a topic like religion that is not quite verifiable through the usual methods of knowledge? With so many religions and hence competing versions for the truth, how shall one decide, since all of them claim to be the truth, and all of them claim that their scriptures are true revelation from the divine? The pragmatist may at this point argue that the truth is what works, so if a particular religion works for you, then it is your truth. Except truth does not work like that. It is not your truth or my truth, but the truth. Yet, given how unlikely we are about to find out what the true religion is, since thousands of years have elapsed where no definitive answer is yet to be found, what shall we do? As far as I understand what pragmatism is, I do not think it will be able to answer this question. Even if we accept pragmatism's logic to go with what works, we still have to discover what works, while bearing the weight of skepticism and doubt. It seems that for those who have not yet found their religion, they may have to keep searching. Besides, truth is not what works. Aristotle's physics from the 4th century BCE worked well for over 1,000 years, but that does not make it correct. A dogmatic insistence by the church that it is correct stymied the progress of science with the persecution of thinkers like Giordano Bruno in the 16th century and Galileo Galilei in the 17th century, and required convoluted ad hoc Ptolemaic epicycles to explain what it could not understand. Even today, Newtonian mechanics and the planetary model of the atom mostly works well to explain terrestrial phenomena and chemical reactions respectively, but that does not make them correct. All of these theories bump up against limits, facing increasing amounts of anomalies and preventing the scientific enterprise from moving forward until they are overtaken. Next, on pain of consistency, James will have to agree that just as philosophical argument is likely to be insufficient to convert a non-believer, arguments based on religious experience are also unlikely to win over especially those who have not had the kind of extreme experiences he presents in the lectures. Were a clear vision or voice that leaves one intellectually and morally elevated is certainly convincing as a proof of God's existence, goodness, and supreme power. James does not tell us how to have such experiences, though there are other texts, practices, and religious teachers who teach that. In addition, how does one know if one's experience is of the divine or the diabolical? James tells us that it is from the fruits that we will know. If the fruits are good and moral, then it is of the divine. This can be challenged by looking at Abraham, father of the faith of the Semitic religions, that is, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. John Paul Sartre points out that Abraham still had to decide who the voice commanding him to kill his son belonged to, whether it was God or the devil. After all, the command was to commit murder, which Abraham would know to be morally wrong since it is in contravention of the Mosaic commandments. Søren Kierkegaard also warns us that the fruits may only be known at the end, but yet we have to decide at the beginning of our actions. Kierkegaard's point can also be viewed as a refutation of pragmatism at large. Even if we accept the pragmatist dictum that truth is what works, we may not know what is going to work until way after we have acted. It is at the commencement of action that we need to know if it will work, if it is going to guide us at all. This criticism of pragmatism is especially poignant for cases we have never encountered before and may never encounter again. Pragmatism itself does not seem to work so well. Besides, does one first believe in order to have the experience, or does one first experience which leads one to believe? St. Paul was not a believer prior to his illumination on the road to Damascus. He was in fact a persecutor of Christians. Most other accounts are from those who already believe, who are then blessed with mystical experiences. However, if one does not yet believe and have no experience to convince one to believe, what will be one's motivation to believe? The testimony of others, especially first-hand accounts from people deemed reliable by us, can be persuasive. But should one make the leap of faith but never have the kind of convincing experience James relates, should one then stop believing? The Bible tells us that blessed are those who have not seen but yet have believed. But what shall that belief be based on, since intellectual knowledge may not be able to provide sufficient evidence, and one has not had a convincing religious experience? What serves as a convincing experience? It can be argued that the magnificence of nature, or the very fact that one is alive, is in itself rather miraculous in a modified argument from design. What more evidence does one need? But it is for the same reason that James chooses to limit experiences. They are more convincing and easier to discern the essence of because of their extreme nature. In the provision of evidence, the clearer the better, since it leaves less room for ambiguity. To be fair, James was not trying to prove the existence of God through religious experiences. In fact, based on his pragmatist orientation, he is saying that it does not quite matter so long as one's life is enriched as a result of one's beliefs. He is certainly not advocating for any particular religion, even his family's Christian belief, which he does not share. He confesses in the lectures that he has not had a religious experience himself and hence must depend on the accounts of others. He talks about the power of prayer and how religious work is done through that form of communion with God, though he tells us elsewhere that he could not pray and is unable to enter into a personal relationship with God. His personal overbelief is not quite orthodox, where he talks about how there are many worlds of consciousness that we are unconscious of that yet provides us meaning. It seems he may be considering the term God as a placeholder for a higher divine power, the spirit within us, a general tendency towards the good present in nature, or perhaps a kind of cosmic consciousness, unlike the ideas of God from the major religions. Whatever God may ultimately be, James does believe that there is something and that it is good to believe in it. He considers agnosticism to be a cop-out, an untenable position tantamount to disbelief, since it lands one in the same soup as disbelief or wrong belief if indeed there is a God. What James has done in this book is to examine human psychology and the energizing power behind religious beliefs and experiences. He thinks that belief in God may be an instinctive part of human nature. He suggests that what one may be experiencing in a religious experience is the power of the subconscious mind, or as in his own overbelief, that there may be more things in heaven and earth that are dreamed of in our science, theology, or philosophy. Those having religious experiences may be experiencing those instead. Thank you for listening to the Philosophical Bachelor.